Earlier, we spoke with Andrew Ross Sorkin about the World Economic Forum last week, and one of the big foreign policy stories out of the summit was an address by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, warning that Russia's Vladimir Putin had aspirations beyond Ukraine, nearly 2 years after he launched a full-scale invasion of the country. Joining us now, senior correspondent for Time, Simon Schuster. His new book is entitled The Showman, Inside the Invasion That Shook the World and Made a Leader of Volodymyr Zelensky. And Jonathan Lemire has the first question. He's there with him.
Simon, good to see you. Congrats on the book. Let's just start with this extraordinary access you had to President Zelensky. Walk us through how often you saw him, where you saw him, how readers will see him differently.
Well, I met and got to know President Zelensky for the first time before he became president, when he was in the middle of his campaign. I met him backstage at one of his comedy shows, actually, which kind of doubled as a campaign rally. And met him, talked to him, profiled him for the first time for Time magazine then, and basically followed his administration through the first impeachment of then President Donald Trump, where President Zelensky played a major role, as I think a lot of your viewers will remember. And as the war grew closer, I traveled with the president to the front lines to see the Russian forces gathering on the border. When the invasion actually began in February 2022, I was in a pretty unique position because of the relationships I'd established over those years to approach him and say, you know, let me be a fly on the wall. Let me write this book about the historic events happening around you.
And Simon, I mean, you're so right that viewers of the show, Americans writ large, knew him, you know, as this comedian, as someone who was involved in the Trump first impeachment. And it's this remarkable transformation where he's become almost a Churchill-like figure as a symbol of resistance as Ukraine repels the invasion of a much larger Russian army. Tell us, did you see that? Talk to us how you saw that evolution occur.
Yeah, I mean, his transformation was dramatic, you know, from the fairly naive, happy-go-lucky character I met in 2019 when he was running for office on a very optimistic platform of fighting corruption, ending the war that was then raging already for 5 years in eastern Ukraine, the kind of separatist conflict. That was his goal. The person we know now he wears this kind of armor. You know, you see him on TV and he's just tough as nails. So that transformation is kind of described in the book as an evolution. You know, you mentioned Churchill. I asked him about these comparisons to Churchill, and one very telling moment in the book is he said, yeah, I don't really like comparisons to Churchill so much. Churchill was a noted imperialist, a supporter of the British Empire. And Zelensky sees this war fundamentally as an anti-imperialist war, a war to break the last bonds of empire that Moscow has over Ukraine. So he prefers to be compared to, as he mentioned, actually, characters like Charlie Chaplin, who made fun of Hitler in the middle of the Holocaust. As President Zelensky put it to me in one of our interviews, you know, there were these artists, these figures in history who used their skills as artists, the skills of communication and language, to fight against evil, to fight against fascism. And he said that their work was often more powerful than artillery. So that's sort of how he sees himself, the pantheon he wants to join, the way he understands his role.
That's fascinating. I would say a Churchillian comparison, pretty good. He saved Western civilization of the world in 1940-41. But we'll have that debate with President Zelensky when we talk after the war. I want to talk about before the war, because I think this is a fascinating part of your book where you ask him to reflect on the lead up to the war. What mistakes did you make? This is something we all do in our own lives, but it was something this grand. What I'm struck by is his willingness, his openness to go back and say, maybe I should have done this differently. Maybe I should have done that differently. Talk about what you learned in your reporting about how he could have changed things before the war.
Well, one thing I think he learned the hard way was not to rely too much on some of these Western allies that were supposed to be so close to him. You know, that came through in the early months of his administration when he got caught up with then President Donald Trump in this impeachment scandal. You know, just to remind some of your viewers, President Donald Trump at the time tried to extort political favors from President Zelensky. And I saw that scandal playing out from the halls of the presidential compound in Kyiv, spending time with Zelensky and his team at the time. And one thing he told me was, man, You can't trust anybody at all. You know, none of the allies are that reliable. Everybody just has their interests. So that's, I think, a hard lesson he took, and he took it with him, you know, into the way he's waged this war as well.
What about America's repeated warning that Russia was going to invade, and his refusal to believe that?
I'm sorry, say the question again?
I said, what about America's repeated warning that Russia was going to invade Ukraine and Zelensky's reluctance to believe that?
Yeah, that is a big part of the lead up to the war that I chronicle in the book. He didn't believe it. He was getting a variety of intelligence from different sources. The U.S. intelligence agencies turned out to be right, and they were predicting the most kind of extreme scenario, right, of this massive full-scale invasion from 3 directions meant to kill Zelensky or remove him from power. He was getting different perspectives from German intelligence, French intelligence, and indeed Ukrainian intelligence agencies that had different interpretations. So he chose to believe a less extreme scenario was coming, a more limited escalation from the east. He turned out to be wrong. The U.S. intelligence agencies turned out to be right. I think that's something he's going to have to answer for later in the war. Those questions are bubbling up already in Ukrainian society, but so far they've left it till after the war to kind of have a reckoning on those questions.
The new book, entitled The Showman Inside the Invasion That Shook the World and Made a Leader of Volodymyr Zelensky, is on sale tomorrow. Time. Senior correspondent Simon Schuster, thank you so much for coming on this morning. And that